Welcome to Forgotten Myths. Get comfortable. Let your breathing slow. Let the weight of the day fall away. Tonight, we're talking about hubris. It's a Greek word. We translate it as pride or arrogance, but that doesn't quite capture it. Hubris was something more specific, more dangerous. Hubris was when a mortal forgot their place, when they looked at the gods, immortal, all-powerful, eternal, and thought, I am their equal. I am their better. I don't need to bow. The Greeks believed this was the worst sin a human could commit. Not murder, not theft, not cruelty, hubris. Because when you commit hubris, you're not just breaking a law, you're disrupting the natural order of the universe. You're saying that the hierarchy between gods and mortals doesn't apply to you. And the gods did not appreciate that. Tonight, we're telling 6 stories. Arachne, the weaver who challenged Athena to a contest, who created a tapestry so perfect that even the goddess couldn't find a flaw, who was transformed into a spider for her arrogance. Marsyas, the satyr who found a magical flute, who played it so beautifully that he dared challenge Apollo himself, who lost and was flayed alive as punishment. Niobe, the queen who had 14 perfect children, who boasted that she was greater than a goddess, who watched every single one of them die. Actaeon, the hunter who wandered into the wrong clearing, who saw something he shouldn't have seen, who was torn apart by his own dogs. Sisyphus, the king who thought he could outsmart death itself, who cheated the gods not once but twice, who now pushes a boulder up a hill for eternity. And Tantalus, the king who was invited to dine with the gods, who repaid their hospitality with the most horrific crime imaginable, who now stands in water he cannot drink, beneath fruit he cannot eat, forever. These are the mortals who angered the gods. Their punishments were legendary, and the Greeks told their stories as warnings. Know your place, remember what you are. The gods are watching, and they do not forgive. In the region of Lydia, in a small town called Hypipi, there lived a girl named Arachne. Her father was a wool dyer, a craftsman, but not a wealthy one. They lived simply in a modest house surrounded by the tools of their trade. Arachne should have been nobody. But she had a gift. She could weave, not just competently, not just well. She could weave like no one had ever woven before. Her fingers moved across the loom like they were dancing. The threads seemed to obey her thoughts rather than her hands. The patterns she created were so intricate, so detailed, so alive, that people came from miles around just to watch her work. The fabric she produced was impossibly fine, soft as clouds, light as air. The colors she achieved seemed to glow from within. Nymphs left their forests and streams to see her weave. They would stand in her workshop for hours, watching, mesmerized. Surely, they said, Athena herself must have taught you. Athena, the goddess of wisdom, the goddess of crafts, the patron of weavers everywhere. It was meant as a compliment, the highest compliment a weaver could receive. But Arachne didn't take it that way. Athena? Arachne laughed. What does Athena have to do with my skill? I taught myself. I practiced for years. Every thread, every pattern, every technique. I figured it out on my own. The nymphs exchanged nervous glances. But surely, one of them said, the goddess blessed you with talent. Talent? Arachne's eyes flashed. I have more than talent. I have skill. I have dedication. I have years of practice and sacrifice. Don't give credit to some goddess sitting on a cloud. I earned this. The nymphs fell silent. In fact, Arachne continued, and there was something reckless in her voice now, something dangerous, I'd challenge Athena herself to a contest, my weaving against hers, and I'd win. The nymphs gasped. You didn't challenge the gods. You didn't even joke about challenging the gods. The gods heard everything. The gods remembered everything, and the gods punished everything. But Arachne wasn't joking. She meant every word. Word of Arachne's boast spread quickly. It reached the villages. It reached the cities. It reached Mount Olympus itself. Athena heard what the mortal girl had said. The goddess was intrigued. She had been worshipped for millennia. Mortals built temples to her. They offered sacrifices. They praised her name. But none of them had ever challenged her. This girl, this nobody from a small town in Lydia, thought she could outweave a goddess? Athena decided to give her a chance to take it back. She disguised herself as an old woman, gray-haired, bent, leaning on a staff. She hobbled into Arachne's workshop. Child, the old woman said, I've heard the things you've been saying. I've come to give you some advice. Arachne looked up from her loom. Advice? You're young, you're proud. That's understandable. But the things you've said about Athena, those are dangerous words. The goddess is merciful, but she won't tolerate disrespect. Arachne's jaw tightened. Disrespect? I've told the truth. My weaving is better than anyone's, including hers. You've never seen her weave? I don't need to. I know what I can do, and I know that no one, mortal or immortal, can match it. The old woman's eyes narrowed. Be careful, child. There's still time to apologize. Athena might forgive you if you show proper humility. Humility? Arachne stood up from her loom. Why should I be humble? I'm the best weaver in the world. That's not arrogance, it's fact. And if Athena disagrees, she can come down here and prove me wrong. The old woman was silent for a long moment. Then she smiled, and then she changed. The bent posture straightened. The gray hair turned golden. The wrinkled skin became smooth and luminous. The old woman was gone. In her place stood Athena, the goddess of wisdom, the goddess of war, the goddess of crafts. She was taller than any mortal. Her eyes were gray and piercing, the color of storm clouds. She wore armor beneath her robes. A spear materialized in her hand. The nymphs who had been watching fell to their knees immediately. They pressed their faces to the floor, trembling. Arachne stood her ground. Her heart was pounding. Her hands were shaking, but she didn't kneel. She didn't look away. You wanted a contest, Athena said. Her voice was calm, measured. Very well, you'll have one. 2 looms were set up, side by side. Athena at one, Arachne at the other. The finest threads were provided. Wool dyed in every color imaginable, gold and silver thread, silk so delicate it was almost invisible. The nymphs watched. Word had spread, and now mortals were gathering too, hundreds of them, pressing into Arachne's workshop and spilling out into the street. Everyone wanted to see the contest. Everyone wanted to see what would happen when a mortal challenged a god. Both weavers began at the same moment. Their hands became blurs. Thread flew through thread. Patterns emerged from nothing. The crowd fell silent, watching in awe. Athena worked with divine precision. Every movement was calculated. Every thread was placed exactly where it needed to be. There was no waste, no hesitation, no error. Arachne worked differently. Her hands seemed to move of their own accord. She didn't plan, she felt. She let the design emerge organically, trusting her instincts, letting the tapestry become what it wanted to become. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky. Still the two weavers worked. The crowd brought food and water, but neither woman ate or drank. Their concentration was absolute. As evening fell, both tapestries were nearly complete. Athena finished first. She stepped back from her loom and waited. The goddess's creation was magnificent. In the center, she had woven the contest between herself and Poseidon for the city of Athens. The Saoshu scene showed the great rock of the Acropolis. Poseidon stood on one side, striking the ground with his trident. From the wound in the earth, a spring of salt water erupted, his gift to the city. On the other side stood Athena. She knelt and planted something in the soil. An olive tree grew, her gift. More useful than salt water, more valuable. The assembled gods judged the contest. In the tapestry, you could see them deliberating, pointing, arguing, and then raising their hands in favor of Athena. The city was named for her, Athens. The tapestry told the story of Athena's greatest triumph. But there was more. Around the edges of the main scene, Athena had woven smaller images, cautionary tales. In one corner, a woman named Rhodope was being transformed into a mountain. Her crime? She and her husband had pretended to be Zeus and Hera. In another corner, a queen named Antigone was becoming a stork. She had boasted that her hair was more beautiful than Hera's. In a third corner, the daughters of Pyrrhus were turning into magpies. They had challenged the muses to a singing contest. And in the fourth corner, a pygmy queen was being changed into a crane. She had declared herself more beautiful than Artemis. The message was clear. This is what happens to mortals who challenge gods. This is what happens to those who forget their place. This will happen to you, Arachne, if you lose. The tapestry was perfect. The colors were vibrant. The figures seemed to move. The gold thread caught the light and blazed like actual fire. It was the most beautiful piece of weaving that had ever existed. And then everyone turned to look at Arachne. Arachne had been weaving too. Her hands had moved just as fast as Athena's, maybe faster. Her concentration had been absolute. Now she stepped back from her loom, and the crowd gasped. Arachne's tapestry was different. It didn't show the gods in their glory. It showed them in their shame. In the center was Zeus. Not Zeus the wise king, not Zeus the father of gods. Zeus the seducer, Zeus the rapist, Zeus the deceiver. The tapestry showed him transforming into a bull to carry off Europa, becoming a swan to assault Leda, turning into an eagle to abduct Ganymede, disguising himself as Artemis to trick Callisto, appearing as a shower of gold to reach Danae in her locked tower. Scene after scene, conquest after conquest, women deceived, assaulted, ruined, and Zeus at the center of it all, taking whatever he wanted, answering to no one. But Zeus wasn't the only god exposed. Poseidon was there too, assaulting Medusa in Athena's own temple, seducing Theophan by becoming a ram, chasing Demeter while she fled in the form of a mare, taking what he wanted, just like his brother. Apollo appeared as well, pursuing Daphne until she begged to be turned into a tree just to escape him, chasing Marpessa until she chose a mortal man instead, hounding Cassandra and then cursing her when she refused him. Dionysus was shown seducing Ariadne after Theseus abandoned her. Hades appeared dragging Persephone into the underworld. Even Cronus was depicted, eating his own children. Every scandal, every crime, every abuse of divine power. Arachne had woven them all. And the worst part? The tapestry was flawless. The technique was perfect. The colors were more vivid than Athena's. The figures were more lifelike. The expressions on the victims' faces were heartbreakingly real. Every thread was exactly where it should be. Every pattern was balanced. Every proportion was correct. Athena walked slowly around Arachne's tapestry. She examined every scene. She looked for a flaw, a misplaced thread, a color that was slightly off, a proportion that was wrong. She found nothing. Arachne hadn't just matched the goddess, she had surpassed her. Athena stared at Arachne's tapestry. Her face was unreadable. The gray eyes moved across the fabric, taking in every scene, every accusation, every perfect stitch. The crowd held its breath. Then Athena's expression shifted. Something cold came into her eyes, something ancient and terrible. She wasn't just angry that Arachne had woven better than her. She was furious that Arachne had told the truth. The gods were cruel. The gods were petty. The gods abused their power. Everyone knew it, but no one said it. No one depicted it. No one dared to throw it in their faces. Until now. Athena raised her hand. She struck the tapestry with her shuttle, the tool used to pass thread through the loom. Once, twice, 3 times. The fabric tore. The perfect, flawless fabric that Arachne had spent hours creating, ripped apart in seconds. But Athena wasn't done. She turned to Arachne, and she struck her too. The shuttle hit Arachne across the face, once, twice, 3 times. Arachne stumbled backward. Her hand went to her cheek where the blows had landed. But it wasn't pain she felt. It was something else. Something strange, something wrong. Her body was changing. Her skin was darkening, hardening, becoming chitinous. Her body was shrinking, compacting, drawing in on itself. Her arms split, became 4 arms, then 6, then 8. Her face elongated. Her eyes multiplied. She tried to scream, but her mouth wasn't a mouth anymore. It was mandibles, fangs, something inhuman. Within seconds, the transformation was complete. Where Arachne had stood, there was now a spider. Small, black, 8-legged, hanging from a single thread of silk. Athena looked down at the creature that had been a girl. "You wanted to weave," the goddess said. "Fine. You'll weave forever, you and all your descendants. But you'll never be human again. You'll never create beauty again. You'll spin your webs in dark corners, and mortals will crush you under their heels, and no one will remember that you ever challenged a god." The spider that was Arachne scuttled away into the shadows, and the crowd dispersed in silence. Every spider, the Greeks said, is a descendant of Arachne. That's why they weave. That's why they spin. That's why they create intricate webs in the corners of houses and the branches of trees. They're still trying to prove that they're the best. They're still refusing to bow. But there's another way to read this story. Arachne told the truth. The gods were cruel. The gods did abuse their power, and for telling that truth, she was punished. She wasn't wrong. She was just powerless. That's what happens when you challenge those in power, even if you're right, even if you're better, even if the whole world can see that you've won. The powerful don't need to be right. They just need to be powerful. Arachne learned that lesson the hard way, and she's still learning it in every dark corner of every house in the world, spinning webs that no one admires, waiting to be swept away One day, a satyr named Marsyas was walking through the forest. Satyrs were wild creatures, half man, half goat, with furry legs, pointed ears, and small horns. They spent their time drinking wine, chasing nymphs, and playing music. They were followers of Dionysus, the god of wine and madness. They lived for pleasure and chaos. Marsyas was no different. He was wandering aimlessly, looking for entertainment, when something in the river caught his eye. Something shining, something unusual. He waded into the water. He reached down. He pulled out a flute. Not an ordinary flute. This one was made of bone. It was carved with intricate patterns. It seemed to hum with power even before anyone played it. Marsyas examined it curiously. Then he put it to his lips. And the most beautiful sound he had ever heard came out. Marsyas didn't know the history of the flute, but there was a history. Athena had invented it, the goddess of wisdom, always creating, always innovating, had designed a new instrument, a double flute capable of producing sounds that no other instrument could match. She had been proud of her invention. She had taken it to a banquet on Olympus to show the other gods. She had begun to play, and Hera and Aphrodite had started laughing. Athena had stopped, confused. "What's funny?" "Your face," Aphrodite had said, barely containing her giggles. "When you play that thing, your cheeks puff out like a frog. You look ridiculous." Athena had been mortified. She was the goddess of wisdom, the goddess of strategic warfare. She was not ridiculous. She had looked at her reflection in a pool of water while playing the flute. And she had seen that Aphrodite was right. The instrument required puffed cheeks and pursed lips. It made even a goddess look foolish. Athena had cursed the flute. "Whoever plays this instrument," she had declared, "will suffer greatly for it." And she had thrown it away, off Olympus, down to the mortal world below, where it had landed in a river, where Marsyas had found it. Marsyas didn't know about the curse. All he knew was that when he played this flute, magic happened. The music was unlike anything he had ever created. It was haunting, beautiful, transcendent. It seemed to speak directly to the soul. He played for the nymphs, and they wept with joy. He played for the other satyrs, and they stopped their revelry to listen in awed silence. He played for the trees and streams, and they seemed to lean toward him, drinking in the sound. Word spread of the satyr with the magical flute. People traveled for miles to hear him play, and Marsyas let it go to his head. "I am the greatest musician in the world," he began to say. "No one can match my skill, not even Apollo himself." The moment he said those words, his fate was sealed. Apollo was the god of music, not just one of the gods who liked music. The god of music, the divine patron of every musician, every singer, every poet. His instrument was the lyre, a stringed instrument, elegant and refined. He played it with divine perfection. When Apollo heard that a satyr was claiming to be a better musician than him, he was not pleased. He descended from Olympus. He found Marsyas in a meadow, surrounded by admirers playing his flute. "You," Apollo said, and his voice cut through the music like a blade, "have made a claim. You say you're a better musician than me." Marsyas lowered his flute. He saw the god standing before him, golden-haired, beautiful, radiating divine power. Any sensible creature would have apologized, would have prostrated himself, would have begged for forgiveness. But Marsyas was a satyr, and satyrs weren't known for their wisdom. "I did say that," Marsyas replied. and I meant it. Apollo smiled. It was not a warm smile. Then let's have a contest, the god said. Your flute against my lyre. We'll let others judge who plays better, and the winner? He paused. The winner can do whatever he wants to the loser. The judges were the muses, the 9 goddesses of the arts, Apollo's own companions. Not exactly impartial judges, but Marsyas was too confident to object. The contest was held in a meadow near the river Meander. Word had spread, and creatures came from miles around to watch. Nymphs and satyrs, of course, but also mortals from nearby villages, even a few minor gods who wanted to see what would happen. Apollo played first. He lifted his lyre and began to play, and the world seemed to hold its breath. The music was perfect. Each note was crystalline, hanging in the air like drops of pure light. The melody was complex and beautiful, weaving through scales and modes that mortals had never heard before. It spoke of order, of harmony, of the divine nature of the universe. It was the sound of the stars moving in their courses, of the seasons turning, of everything being exactly as it should be. The muses nodded in approval. Several of them wept at the beauty. Then it was Marsyas's turn. The satyr raised the flute to his lips. His fingers found their positions. He closed his eyes, and he played. His music was different, wilder, more emotional. Where Apollo's music spoke of cosmic order, Marsyas's music spoke of earthly chaos. It was the sound of wind through trees, of water over stones, of hearts breaking and mending, of life in all its messy, beautiful, painful glory. It was raw, unpolished, imperfect, and it was mesmerizing. The nymphs swayed, the satyrs stomped their hooves. Even the mortals, who understood nothing of divine music, felt something stir in their chests. When Marsyas finished, there was silence. Then, slowly, applause. The judges conferred. It's close, one of them admitted, looking nervously at Apollo. Too close to call, another agreed. Apollo's expression didn't change, but something cold came into his eyes. Another round, the god said, but this time we'll make it more challenging. Apollo lifted his lyre again, but this time, as he played, he began to sing. His voice was divine. It had sung at the banquets of Olympus. It had charmed gods and monsters alike. And now it joined with his instrument, creating a harmony that no flute could possibly match. The lyre could accompany a voice. The flute could not. You cannot sing while blowing into a pipe. And then, as if that weren't enough, Apollo turned his lyre upside down. He played it inverted, perfectly, without missing a note. The music continued, just as beautiful, just as complex, despite the instrument being held the wrong way. It was a display of pure virtuosity, and it was impossible to replicate. The muses applauded, they cheered, they declared Apollo's performance extraordinary. Your turn, Apollo said to Marsyas, a cruel gleam in his eye. Play your instrument upside down, and sing while you play. Marsyas stared at the flute in his hands. He turned it over. He tried to position it. The flute couldn't be played upside down. The holes would be in the wrong position. The airflow would be wrong. It was physically impossible. And singing while playing? You needed your mouth to blow into the instrument. There was no way to form words. The contest was rigged. The god had changed the rules to make victory impossible. I can't, Marsyas admitted. The meadow fell silent. Apollo's smile widened. It was not a pleasant smile. Then I win. The agreement was, Apollo said, that the winner could do whatever he wanted to the loser. Marsyas felt fear creeping up his spine. "I was going to be merciful," Apollo continued. "I was going to let you go with just a warning. But you've wasted my time. You've embarrassed me. You made me come down from Olympus to deal with a satyr who plays a borrowed instrument." He stepped closer to Marsyas. "So I think I'll make an example of you." Apollo gestured. Invisible hands seized Marsyas. They lifted him off the ground. They carried him to a tree and tied him there, spread-eagled against the trunk. "You wanted to know what happens when you challenge a god?" Apollo said. He drew a knife. It was made of golden light. It was sharper than any mortal blade. "I'm going to show you." And he began to cut. Apollo skinned Marsyas alive. He did it slowly, methodically, starting at the top and working his way down. The knife sliced through fur and flesh. It separated skin from muscle. It peeled away the outer layer of Marsyas's body, inch by inch, leaving raw, red tissue exposed. Marsyas screamed. He screamed until his voice gave out. He screamed until he had no breath left. He screamed until screaming was all he was. The nymphs who had admired him wept. The satyrs who had celebrated him fled in terror. The trees seemed to shudder. But Apollo didn't stop. "This is what pride gets you," the god said, almost conversationally as he worked. "This is what happens when you forget what you are." The flaying took hours. When it was done, Marsyas was unrecognizable, a bloody, twitching mass of exposed nerves and muscles hanging from the tree. He died shortly after. But that wasn't the end of the story. The satyrs and nymphs gathered Marsyas's skin. They wept over it. They mourned for their friend who had been punished so brutally for such a small crime. And as they wept, something strange happened. Their tears began to collect. They pooled on the ground. They gathered into a stream. The stream became a river, the Marsyas River in Phrygia. You can find it on ancient maps. It was a real place. The Greeks said that the river was formed from the tears of those who mourned the satyr, that every drop of water in it was a drop of grief. Some versions of the story say that Marsyas himself became the river, that his spirit lives on in the rushing water, still playing his music, still making beautiful sounds, forever beyond Apollo's reach. And the flute? The cursed instrument that had started everything? It washed downstream. It tumbled through rapids and over waterfalls. It disappeared into the depths. Maybe it's still out there somewhere. Maybe it's waiting for the next fool to pick it up. Niobe had everything. She was the queen of Thebes, one of the greatest cities in Greece. Her husband, Amphion, was a powerful king. Her father was Tantalus, who had once dined with the gods themselves. But her greatest treasures were her children. 7 sons, 7 daughters, 14 children in total, each one beautiful, each one healthy, each one accomplished. The sons were skilled in warfare and athletics. They rode horses like centaurs. They threw javelins like gods. The daughters were graceful and lovely. They played music. They wove tapestries. They danced with a beauty that stopped hearts. Niobe looked at her children, and she saw perfection. She looked at her life, and she saw no equal. And she made the mistake of saying so out loud. It was the day of a festival. The people of Thebes were gathering to honor Leto, the Titaness, the mother of Apollo and Artemis. They were building altars. They were bringing offerings. They were preparing to worship. Niobe watched from her palace balcony, and something stirred in her chest. Resentment. Why do they worship Leto? she said to her attendants. "What has Leto done that's so impressive?" Her attendants exchanged nervous glances. "She gave birth to 2 gods," one of them ventured. 2. Niobe laughed. 2 children, that's all. I have 14. 7 sons who are stronger and braver than Apollo ever was. 7 daughters who are more beautiful than Artemis ever was. My queen... And who is Leto anyway? A titaness who had to hide on a tiny island to give birth because Hera was hunting her. A goddess who begged for shelter. A mother of only 2. Niobe's voice was rising now. She was no longer speaking to her attendants. She was speaking to the crowd below. "Why do you worship her?" Niobe called out. "Why do you bring offerings to someone who has so little? You should worship me. I am richer, more powerful, more blessed than Leto ever was." The crowd fell silent. "Take down those altars," Niobe commanded. "Stop this festival. If you must worship a mother, worship me. I have earned it. Leto has not." And because she was the queen, and because they were afraid, the people obeyed. They dismantled the altars. They abandoned the offerings. They stopped worshipping Leto. And on Mount Olympus, Leto heard every word. Leto was not a vengeful goddess by nature. She was patient. She was gentle. She had endured persecution from Hera. She had wandered the earth, homeless and desperate, while pregnant with Zeus's children. But there were limits. Watching a mortal woman mock her, watching her worship disrupted, watching her children compared unfavorably to mere mortals. That was beyond what any goddess could tolerate. Leto went to her children. "Did you hear what she said?" Leto asked. Her voice was quiet, but there was something dangerous in it. "Did you hear how she spoke of me?" Apollo and Artemis had heard. "She said you were nothing," Leto continued. "She said your brother and sister, her mortal children, were greater than you. She ordered your altars destroyed. She turned your worshippers away." Apollo's hand went to his bow. Artemis's fingers curled around her arrows. "Will you let this stand?" Leto asked. They would not. Apollo descended to Thebes first. He found Niobe's 7 sons outside the city walls. They were riding horses, practicing for races, competing with each other in the way that brothers do. They were laughing. The oldest, Ismenis, was teaching his younger brothers how to control their horses at full gallop. He was 20 years old, strong and confident, already a leader among the youth of Thebes. Sisyphus, the second son, was racing against Phaedamus. Their horses thundered across the plain, kicking up dust, while the younger brothers cheered. Tantalus, named for his grandfather, was practicing archery from horseback. Alphenor was wrestling with Damasichthon in the grass. The 2 youngest, Ilioneus and the boy they simply called the little one, were watching it all, eager to join in when they were older. A perfect afternoon, a perfect family. Apollo raised his bow, the bow of a god, the bow that never missed, the bow whose arrows carried the heat of the sun itself. He fired. Ismenis fell first, without a sound. One moment he was sitting tall on his horse, demonstrating the proper posture. The next moment an arrow had pierced his heart, and he was tumbling to the ground. His horse screamed and bolted. Sisyphus turned at the noise. "Brother, what?" An arrow took him through the throat. He clutched at his neck, blood pouring between his fingers, and collapsed. Phaedamus tried to ride to his brothers. He spurred his horse, trying to reach them, trying to help. An arrow caught him in the back. He fell from his saddle and didn't move. The remaining brothers finally understood that something was wrong, that they were under attack, that they needed to flee. Tantalus, the archer, tried to fight back. He knocked an arrow of his own, looking frantically for an enemy to shoot. There was no visible enemy, just death, arriving from nowhere. Apollo's arrow pierced his chest before he could loose his own shot. Alphenor ran to his fallen brothers. "Help!" he screamed. "Someone help us!" He knelt beside Sisyphus, trying to stop the bleeding, trying to save him. An arrow pinned them together, through Alphenor's back, into Sisyphus's body beneath him. They died in each other's arms. Demosithon tried to run. He sprinted toward the city, his young legs pumping, his breath coming in terrified gasps. He made it nearly 100 yards before the arrow found him. That left only Ilioneus, the youngest of the sons, 14 years old, with soft cheeks and frightened eyes. He knelt in the grass where his brothers had been playing. He raised his hands to the sky. "Please," he called out, "please, whatever God is doing this, I beg you, spare me. I haven't done anything wrong. I'm just a boy. Please." Apollo hesitated. For a moment, just a moment, the god felt something like pity. But then he remembered Niobe's words. He remembered the insult. He remembered his mother's tears. The arrow flew. Ilioneus fell. 7 sons, 7 arrows, 7 bodies scattered across the plain. The horses wandered among the corpses, confused and frightened, nudging their fallen masters, waiting for them to get up. They would wait a long time. Niobe heard the screaming. Servants came running. They told her what had happened. They described the scene. Her sons, her beautiful sons, lying dead outside the walls. She didn't believe it. She ran to see for herself. And when she saw the bodies, something broke inside her. She fell to her knees. She clutched her youngest son's body, still warm, still bleeding from the arrow in his back. "Why?" she screamed. "Why? They were innocent. They didn't do anything." But even in her grief, even in her horror, Niobe didn't understand. She didn't apologize. She didn't repent. Instead, she looked up at the sky where she imagined Leto was watching, and she said, "You've taken 7, but I still have 7 more. I still have more children than you." It was the worst thing she could have said. Artemis had been waiting, the goddess of the hunt, the protector of young women, the virgin archer whose aim was as deadly as her brother's. She had watched Apollo kill the sons. She had heard Niobe's defiant words. And now it was her turn. Niobe's 7 daughters were in the palace. They had heard about their brothers. They were weeping, clinging to each other, terrified. Their mother burst in. "Hide," Niobe gasped. "We have to hide you. We have to." An arrow shattered the window. It struck the oldest daughter in the heart. The other girls screamed. They ran. They scattered through the palace, trying to find safety. There was no safety. Artemis was the greatest hunter in existence. She could track a deer through a midnight forest. She could hit a bird in flight from a mile away. 7 daughters running through a palace were no challenge at all. The second daughter made it to her bedroom. An arrow found her through the door. The third hid under a table. The arrow went through the table and through her. The fourth tried to disguise herself as a servant. Artemis saw through it instantly. The fifth jumped from a window, hoping to escape. The arrow caught her before she hit the ground. The sixth prayed. She knelt before a statue of Athena and begged for divine protection. Artemis's arrow killed her mid-prayer. The seventh, the youngest, A girl of barely 6 years clung to her mother. "Please," Niobe begged. "Please, not her. You've taken all the others. Leave me one, just one." She wrapped her body around her daughter. She tried to shield her with her own flesh. The arrow went through both of them. Niobe felt it pierce her daughter's chest. She felt the small body go limp in her arms, and she kept holding on. She kept holding on long after there was nothing left to hold. Niobe didn't move from that spot. She held her daughter's body and she wept. She wept until she had no tears left. She wept until her voice was gone. She wept until weeping was all she was. Days passed. Her husband Amphion, driven mad by grief, killed himself. Her servants fled. The palace fell silent, but Niobe kept weeping. And slowly something began to happen. Her skin hardened. Her flesh became rigid. Her body grew cold and gray. She was turning to stone. The grief was so complete, so total, that her humanity couldn't contain it anymore. She was becoming something else, something eternal, something that could hold an infinite amount of sorrow. When the transformation was complete, there was no woman left, just a rock on a mountainside in Phrygia, shaped vaguely like a kneeling woman. And from that rock, water flowed, constantly, endlessly, a stream of tears that never stopped. The locals called it the Weeping Rock. They said it was Niobe, still mourning her children, still crying for what she had lost, still being punished for her pride. Actaeon was the greatest hunter in Greece. He was the grandson of Cadmus, the founder of Thebes. Royal blood flowed in his veins. He could have lived a life of luxury, sitting on cushions, being fed grapes by servants. But Actaeon cared nothing for thrones or politics. All he cared about was the hunt. From the time he could walk, he had been fascinated by the forests, by the animals that lived in them, by the challenge of tracking, pursuing, killing. His father had given him his first bow when he was 6 years old. By 7, he had killed his first deer. By 10, he was hunting boar. By 15, he could track a wounded stag through a midnight forest without losing the trail. Now he was a man, and he was the best. He had 50 hunting dogs, 50. He knew each one by name. He had trained them from puppies, teaching them to follow his voice, to obey his commands, to work together as a pack. There was Blackfoot, the fastest of them all. Tracker, who could follow a scent through a rainstorm. Wildfire, whose bark could be heard from miles away. Strongjaw, who could bring down a boar single-handedly. They were loyal to him beyond measure. They loved him more than dogs should be capable of loving, and he loved them back. One morning, Actaeon and his companions set out early. The dawn was just breaking over the mountains. The air was cool and clean. The hunt went well. By midday, they had killed several deer. The dogs were happy, panting and wagging their tails, proud of their work. Actaeon looked up at the sun, blazing in the center of the sky. "Let's rest," he said to his companions. "The afternoon heat is too strong. The animals will be hiding anyway. We'll continue when it cools." His companions agreed. They found a shady grove and settled down to sleep. But Actaeon was restless. He couldn't sleep during the day. His mind was too active. His body was too energetic. He wandered away from the group. He pushed through the underbrush, exploring terrain he had never seen before. The forest was old here, ancient trees, their trunks wider than houses, moss covering everything in soft green carpets. The air smelled of earth and growing things. He heard the sound of water, a stream somewhere nearby, a waterfall, maybe. The sound was cool and inviting. He followed it. The stream led to a pool. The pool was fed by a small waterfall, tumbling down a rock face into a basin of clear water. The basin was surrounded by smooth stones and overhanging trees. It was beautiful. It was secluded. It looked like a place that humans weren't supposed to find. Actaeon pushed through the last of the undergrowth and stepped into the clearing. And then he stopped. He stopped breathing. He stopped thinking. A woman was bathing in the pool. No, not a woman, a goddess. Artemis, goddess of the hunt, goddess of the wilderness, goddess of the moon. She was naked, standing in the pool, water cascading over her shoulders. Her divine body was perfect, slender but strong, the body of an eternal huntress. Her hair was wet, clinging to her back in dark rivulets. Her skin gleamed in the dappled sunlight that filtered through the trees. She was surrounded by nymphs. Her attendants, they were bathing her, pouring water over her from silver vessels, washing her hair with oils that smelled of wild herbs. They were all naked, and Artemis was looking directly at Actaeon. For one eternal moment, no one moved. No one breathed. Their eyes met, the goddess and the hunter, and Actaeon felt something cold run down his spine. He knew he should run. He knew he should fall to his knees and beg forgiveness. He knew he should do something, anything, other than stand there staring. But he couldn't move. He couldn't look away. The nymphs saw Actaeon first. They screamed, high, piercing sounds that echoed through the forest. They rushed to their mistress, trying to cover her divine body with their own, trying to shield her from the mortal's gaze. But it was too late. He had seen. Artemis was a virgin goddess. She had sworn an eternal oath, never to be touched by man, never to be seen by man, never to be vulnerable to masculine desire. In all the millennia of her existence, no man had ever seen her unclothed. No man had ever violated the sanctity of her bath. Until now, this hunter, this mortal, had stumbled into her most private moment, had seen her naked, had witnessed her vulnerability, had defiled her sacred space with his mortal eyes. Artemis's face transformed. The cool beauty became something else, something ancient and terrible. Her eyes blazed with a light that was not quite sane. The nymphs cowered. Even they, who had served her for centuries, were afraid. "You," Artemis said. Her voice was like ice cracking. "You have seen what no mortal should see." Actaeon finally found his voice. "Goddess, I didn't mean... I was just walking. I heard water. I didn't know..." Silence. The word hit him like a physical blow. His mouth snapped shut. "You've seen me," Artemis continued. "Now go. Tell everyone what you witnessed here today. Tell them you saw Artemis bathing. Tell them what the goddess of the hunt looks like without her armor." She paused. A smile crossed her face. It was not a pleasant smile. "Tell them," she said, "if you can." She raised her hand. She flicked her wrist. Water from the pool rose up, a single splash, no more, and struck Actaeon in the face, and his body began to change. Actaeon felt his skull stretching, his forehead pushed forward, his nose elongated, his ears migrated to the top of his head. He reached up to touch his face and found antlers sprouting from his scalp. Antlers. He was turning into a deer. "No," he tried to say, but his voice came out as a strange animal sound, a bark, a bleat. His hands were shrinking, his fingers fused together, becoming hooves. His spine curved. His legs bent backward. Fur sprouted across his body. Within seconds, the transformation was complete. Where Actaeon had stood, there was now a stag. A large, magnificent stag, with a full rack of antlers and a sleek brown coat. But behind the animal's eyes, Actaeon was still there. He was still conscious, still aware, still human in his mind, even as his body had become something else entirely. He tried to cry out. He tried to scream for help. All that emerged was the desperate bleating of a deer. Actaeon ran. He crashed through the underbrush, his new hooves uncertain beneath him. He didn't know where he was going. He just knew he had to get away. He heard barking behind him. His dogs? They had heard the noise. They had woken up. They were doing what he had trained them to do. They were hunting. Actaeon tried to run faster, but he wasn't used to this body. He stumbled. He staggered. He couldn't move with the grace of a natural deer. The dogs were gaining. He recognized their voices. He knew each bark, each howl, Blackfoot, Tracker, Wildfire, his loyal companions, the animals he had raised from puppies. They didn't recognize him. They saw a deer. They saw prey, and they were hungry. The first dog caught up to him. It was Olympus, the fastest of the pack. Actaeon had named him for his black feet. He had raised him from a tiny, squirming puppy. Olympus had slept at the foot of Actaeon's bed for years. He had been the first to greet his master every morning. He had been the most devoted, the most loyal, the most loving of all 50 dogs. Now Olympus saw only a deer running from the pack. Prey. He leaped, jaws clamped down on Actaeon's hindquarters. Teeth? The teeth Actaeon had cleaned as a puppy, had checked for decay as an adult, tore through flesh. Actaeon screamed, or tried to. The sound that emerged was a deer's cry of terror, a high, bleating wail that only made the dogs more excited. More dogs arrived. They surrounded him. They lunged. Tracker, who could follow a scent through any terrain, bit into his left flank. Wildfire, whose bark had once been music to Actaeon's ears, snarled and snapped at his throat. Strongjaw, the one who could bring down boars, clamped his massive jaws around Actaeon's front leg and began to pull. 50 dogs, 50 friends, 50 loyal companions who had loved him. They swarmed over him like a living wave. Actaeon fell. The pack covered him completely, a mass of fur and teeth and fury, each dog trying to get a piece of the kill, each dog following the instincts that Actaeon himself had honed. Inside the deer's body, Actaeon felt everything. He felt his flesh being torn away in strips. He felt his blood pouring out, soaking the grass beneath him. He felt his bones cracking under the pressure of jaws he had trained. He tried to tell them to stop. He tried to call their names: Blackfoot, Tracker, Wildfire, Strongjaw, the names they knew, the names they had always responded to. But he couldn't speak. His mouth was a deer's mouth. His tongue was a deer's tongue. The only sounds he could make were the sounds of an animal dying, and still he was aware. Still he was Actaeon. Still he could feel, think, understand. He knew who was killing him. He knew they didn't know what they were doing. He knew that if they understood, they would stop. But they would never understand. They would never know. He felt himself weakening. Blood loss. Shock. His vision was darkening at the edges. The last thing he saw was Olympus. Beautiful, loyal Olympus, standing over him with blood dripping from his muzzle. And in the dog's eyes, there was nothing. No recognition, no guilt, No understanding, just hunger, just instinct, just the satisfaction of a successful hunt. Actaeon closed his eyes, and finally, mercifully, he died. When the other hunters found the scene, they saw their dogs gathered around a fallen stag. The deer had been destroyed. Barely anything was left, just scraps of flesh, fragments of bone, and a few blood-stained antlers. "Good kill," one of the hunters said. He was proud of the dogs. They had brought down a large stag without any human assistance. "But where's Actaeon?" another asked. "He'll want to see this." They looked around. They called his name. No answer. They searched the area. They found his discarded cloak, his hunting spear, his water skin. But no Actaeon. They searched for hours. As the sun set, they kept searching. They searched through the night, carrying torches, calling his name until their voices gave out. They searched for days. They never found him. Some said he had wandered off and gotten lost. Some said he had fallen into a ravine or been attacked by a wild animal. Some said he had offended some god and been punished. No one guessed the truth. No one could have guessed. Only the dogs knew what had really happened, and they couldn't tell anyone. They just whimpered and refused to eat, confused and grief-stricken, somehow sensing that something terrible had occurred. That the stag they had killed had been more than just a deer. That they had devoured the man who loved them. That they had been the instruments of divine punishment. They didn't understand. Dogs can't understand things like that. But they felt it. And some of them never recovered. Some of them refused food and water until they died, loyal to the end, even to a master they had killed. Sisyphus was the king of Corinth. He was known for many things: his wealth, his power, the magnificent city he had built. But mostly, he was known for being clever, too clever. Sisyphus could talk his way out of anything. He could trick anyone. He saw the world as a puzzle to be solved, a game to be won. Even the gods were not exempt from his manipulations. Once, Zeus abducted a river god's daughter. The river god came to Sisyphus, desperate, asking if he had seen anything. Sisyphus had seen everything. He knew exactly where Zeus had taken the girl, and he told the river god, in exchange for a spring of fresh water for his city. He sold information about Zeus. He betrayed the king of the gods for plumbing. Zeus was furious, but he couldn't deny that Sisyphus had been clever. "Fine," Zeus said. "Let him think he's won, but his day will come." Sisyphus grew old. Even clever kings grow old eventually. His hair turned gray, then white. His strong body weakened. His quick mind began to slow, but his cunning never dimmed. Even as his body failed, his mind was still working, still scheming, still looking for angles. One day, he looked up and saw a figure standing in his throne room. No one had announced a visitor. No one had opened the doors. The figure had simply appeared. Thanatos, death itself. Not Hades, the god of the underworld. Thanatos was something else, older, more primal, a personification of the end that awaited all living things. He was tall and gaunt, wrapped in a black cloak that seemed to absorb light. His face was pale, his eyes empty, his expression utterly neutral. He carried chains, heavy bronze chains that glowed with a faint, sickly light. "Sisyphus," Thanatos said. His voice was like wind through dead leaves. "Your time has come." Any normal mortal would have accepted their fate, would have made their peace, would have gone quietly. Sisyphus was not normal. His mind was already racing. He had known this day would come. He had prepared for it. "Wait," Sisyphus said, holding up a hand. "Before you bind me, might I ask you something?" Thanatos paused. Mortals usually begged for mercy. They didn't ask questions. "What?" "Those chains. I've never seen anything like them. What are they made of?" Thanatos looked down at the chains in his hands. "Divine bronze, forged by Hephaestus himself." "Fascinating. And how do they work, exactly?" "They bind the soul to my will. Once they're fastened, the dead have no choice but to follow me." "That's remarkable craftsmanship, truly remarkable." Sisyphus walked closer, as if to examine the chains more carefully. "But I don't quite understand the mechanism. How do they fasten?" Thanatos frowned. "What do you mean?" "Well, there must be some kind of clasp, some way to lock them. Could you show me?" This was a strange conversation. Thanatos had been doing this job since the beginning of time. He had collected millions of souls. None of them had ever asked for a demonstration. But the request seemed harmless, and Sisyphus didn't seem to be going anywhere. "Very well," Thanatos said. He held up the chains. He showed how they opened, a complex mechanism of interlocking links. He showed how they closed, a divine clasp that sealed automatically when pressed together. "That's incredible," Sisyphus said, genuine admiration in his voice. "But I'm still not sure I understand. Could you perhaps demonstrate? Put them on yourself, just for a moment, so I can see how they look when they're actually binding someone?" Thanatos hesitated. There was something wrong here. He could sense it, but he couldn't quite identify what. "Just for a moment," Sisyphus repeated. "Then I'll come with you peacefully, I promise." Death had never broken a promise. It had never occurred to him that mortals might. He put the chains on himself. Sisyphus moved faster than an old man should have been able to move. He grabbed the clasp. He pressed it closed. The divine mechanism activated. The chains tightened. They locked into place. Thanatos tried to move his arms. He couldn't. He tried to break free. The chains held. He was trapped. "What?" Thanatos began. "I'm sorry," Sisyphus said, though he didn't look sorry at all. "But I'm not ready to die yet." He called for his guards. He had Thanatos dragged to the deepest cellar in the palace. He had the door sealed and locked and guarded. And then he went back to his throne and smiled. He had done it. He had captured death itself. With Thanatos chained up, death stopped. Not just for Sisyphus, for everyone. Everywhere in the world, at that exact moment, death ceased. The old stopped dying. The sick stopped dying. The injured stopped dying. Soldiers in battle took mortal wounds, spears through their chests, swords through their throats, and kept fighting. They should have died. They didn't. Old people lay in their beds, desperately ill, in terrible pain, praying for release. Release didn't come. Sacrifices to the gods bled on altars but wouldn't expire. The rituals were ruined. The gods grew hungry and angry. At first, people celebrated. No more death. No more loss. It seemed like a miracle. But then the problems began. The wounded didn't heal. They just kept suffering. Soldiers who should have died quick deaths instead lived on in agony, unable to recover, unable to find peace. The sick grew sicker but couldn't expire. They begged their families to end their suffering. Their families couldn't. The old became ancient. Their bodies failed completely, blind, deaf, paralyzed, but still they lived on, trapped in bodies that had become prisons. And there was another problem. Without death, there was no fear of death. And without fear of death, people became reckless. Violence increased. Wars grew more brutal. Why show mercy when your enemy couldn't die anyway? The world fell into chaos. Ares, the god of war, was particularly upset. War without death wasn't war. It was just pointless, endless violence. Where was the glory? Where was the honor? Where was the release? He went to Olympus. He complained to Zeus. "Find out what's happening," Zeus commanded. "Fix it." Ares went to Corinth. He found Thanatos chained in Sisyphus's basement, unable to move, unable to escape. He freed him, and Thanatos, finally released, went straight for Sisyphus. "You're coming with me," Death said. His voice was no longer neutral. It was cold with rage. Now. Sisyphus went, but he wasn't done being clever. Before Thanatos had arrived, Sisyphus had given his wife very specific instructions. "When I die," he had told her, "do not bury me properly. Do not give me coins for the ferryman. Do not perform any of the proper rites. Just dump my body in the street." His wife, confused but obedient, had agreed. So when Sisyphus arrived in the underworld, he had a complaint. He went before Persephone, the queen of the dead. "This is unacceptable," he said. "My wife didn't bury me. She didn't give me the proper rites. I'm wandering around here like a beggar, no different from a criminal or a slave." Persephone was sympathetic. She believed in proper burial. The rites were important. "What do you want me to do?" she asked. "Let me go back," Sisyphus said. "Just for a little while, just long enough to punish my wife for her disrespect, to make sure I'm buried properly. Then I'll return, I promise." It seemed like a reasonable request. Persephone agreed. Sisyphus returned to the world of the living, and he promptly refused to go back. Sisyphus lived for many more years. He walked around Corinth, laughing at death, bragging about how he had tricked the gods not once but twice. But Zeus was watching. He was patient. He could afford to be. He was immortal. Eventually, Sisyphus grew old again. His body failed again. And this time, Zeus sent Hermes himself to collect him. Hermes was the messenger god, the guide of souls. And unlike Thanatos, he was clever. He didn't engage Sisyphus in conversation. He didn't explain anything. He just grabbed the old king and dragged him down to the underworld before Sisyphus could say a word. And this time, there would be no escape. Zeus had designed a special punishment for Sisyphus. Not fire, not chains, not being torn apart by demons. Something worse. Something that would torture a clever man for eternity. Sisyphus was taken to a hill in Tartarus. Not just any hill. A perfect hill, designed by Zeus himself for this specific purpose. The slope was steep, steep enough to be difficult, but not so steep that climbing was impossible. The surface was smooth, but not slippery. The angle was calculated precisely. At the bottom of the hill sat a boulder, a massive boulder, twice the height of a man. Round, heavy, the weight of a small house. "Your task," Zeus said, "is simple. Push that boulder to the top of the hill." Sisyphus looked at the boulder. He looked at the hill. His clever mind was already working, calculating angles and leverage points, figuring out the best approach. "And then?" Sisyphus asked. "Then you're free." Sisyphus almost laughed. This was his punishment? Physical labor? He had expected something creative, something cruel, not exercise. "That's it?" "That's it." Sisyphus shrugged. He walked to the boulder. He placed his hands against its cold, rough surface. He began to push. It was hard work, harder than he expected. The boulder was heavier than it looked. The hill was steeper than it seemed. But Sisyphus was determined. He was Sisyphus. He had outsmarted death itself, twice. He could push a rock up a hill. He leaned into the boulder. He dug his feet into the ground. He pushed with all his strength. The boulder moved, slowly, inch by inch. But it moved. Progress. Sisyphus pushed harder. He found a rhythm. Step, push, step, push. The boulder rolled forward. The summit grew closer. Sweat poured down his face. His muscles screamed. His lungs burned. But he could see the top. He was almost there. 10 more feet, 5 more feet, 2 more feet. He could almost touch the summit. 1 more push, and the boulder would crest the hill. 1 more push, and he would be free. He gathered all his remaining strength. He put everything he had into one final effort. The boulder reached the very top of the hill. For one perfect moment, it balanced there, motionless, at the summit, and then it slipped. It rolled backward, slowly at first, then faster. It tumbled down the hill, bouncing and careening, undoing all his work in seconds. It came to rest at the bottom, exactly where it had started. Sisyphus stared. His mind, his clever, clever mind, refused to accept what had just happened. He walked back down. He put his hands on the boulder again. He began to push. Again he made progress. Again he approached the top. Again, just as he was about to succeed, the Uyaotoputua boulder slipped away and rolled back down and came to rest at the bottom, exactly where it had started. That is Sisyphus's punishment. He pushes the boulder up the hill. It rolls back down. He pushes it again. It rolls back down again, forever. He can never rest. He can never stop. The moment he reaches the top, his progress is erased. The hill never changes. The boulder never gets lighter. The summit never gets closer. Every day, if there are days in Tartarus, Sisyphus wakes up and pushes. Every night, he watches his work undone. And the worst part? He can never stop trying. Some force compels him. Some divine curse makes him push, makes him hope, makes him believe that maybe this time will be different. It never is. The cleverest man who ever lived, reduced to pointless, endless labor. Some philosophers have found meaning in this. Albert Camus wrote that we must imagine Sisyphus happy, that the struggle itself is enough, that the journey matters more than the destination. But the Greeks didn't see it that way. They saw Sisyphus's punishment as perfect justice. A man who thought he could outsmart everyone, forever trapped in a task he could never complete. A man who cheated death, condemned to a death in life worse than any mortal ending. A man who thought he was special, learning that he was nothing. Just another sinner in Tartarus, pushing a rock up a hill. Forever, Tantalus was special. Unlike other mortals, he had a direct relationship with the gods. Zeus himself was said to be his father. The Olympians treated him as almost an equal. This was unprecedented. No other mortal in history had ever been so honored. He was invited to their banquets. He sat at their tables, surrounded by divine beings, eating food that no human was supposed to taste. Ambrosia, the food of the gods. It looked like honey, but when you ate it, you could feel it spreading through your body, suffusing you with vitality, with health, with something close to immortality itself. Nectar, the drink of the gods. Sweeter than any wine, more intoxicating than any spirit. One sip and you understood why the gods thought themselves better than mortals. Tantalus ate and drank with them. He listened to their conversations. He heard their secrets, their feuds, their jealousies, their plots against each other. He learned things that no mortal was supposed to know. And somewhere along the way, something changed in him. Maybe it was the food. Maybe it was the company. Maybe he had always been this way, and the gods just hadn't noticed. Tantalus stopped being grateful. He started feeling entitled. Why should the gods have all this and mortals have nothing? Why should he have to return to his earthly kingdom after each banquet, leaving paradise behind? He began to steal. Small things at first, a vial of nectar hidden in his robes, a nugget of ambrosia slipped into his pocket. He brought these divine substances back to the mortal world. He shared them with his friends. He bragged about his access to Olympus, about how the gods trusted him, about how he could take whatever he wanted. The gods noticed. They whispered among themselves, "Perhaps we've been too generous with this mortal. Perhaps he doesn't deserve our hospitality." But they didn't punish him. They should have. They really, really should have. Tantalus began to wonder about the gods. They claimed to be all-knowing, all-seeing. They claimed that nothing happened in the universe without their awareness. But was that really true? He had stolen from them. He had betrayed their secrets, and they hadn't done anything about it. Maybe they didn't know. Maybe they weren't as omniscient as they claimed. A dangerous idea began to form in Tantalus's mind. What if he could prove that the gods were frauds? What if he could show that their vaunted divine wisdom was just an act? He decided to test them. He invited the gods to a banquet at his own palace, a reversal of the usual arrangement. This time, he would be the host. The gods accepted. They were curious to see mortal hospitality. They arrived at Tantalus's palace in their finest raiment, ready to be entertained, but Tantalus had prepared something special. The night before the banquet, Tantalus looked at his son. Pelops was 15 years old, beautiful, innocent, beloved by everyone who knew him. He was Tantalus's only son, his heir, the future of his kingdom. Tantalus killed him. He did it himself, with a knife, in the boy's bedroom while Pelops slept. One moment, the boy was dreaming peaceful dreams. The next moment, his throat was cut. Tantalus didn't feel guilt. He didn't feel horror. He felt only a cold curiosity. Will they notice? Will they know what this meat used to be? He dragged the body to the kitchen. He carved it into pieces the way a butcher would carve a calf. He set the pieces to boil in a great bronze cauldron. He seasoned the meat with herbs and spices. He let it cook through the night, the savory smell filling the palace. By morning, the meal was ready. His son transformed into a stew. And when the gods arrived, Tantalus smiled and welcomed them warmly and led them to the dining hall, where the feast was waiting. The gods arrived in good spirits. They sat at Tantalus's table. They looked at the feast before them, platters of food, vessels of wine, and in the center, a great steaming pot of meat. And immediately, they knew something was wrong. Divine senses are sharper than mortal ones. They could smell beneath the herbs and spices. They could see beyond the cooked meat. They recognized what was in the pot, who was in the pot. One by one, their faces changed. Appetites vanished. Hands froze in midair. Zeus's expression went from curiosity to confusion to dawning horror. "What have you done?" he demanded. Tantalus smiled. It was the smile of a man who thinks he's won. Just testing you, he said. I wanted to see if you'd notice. You murdered your own child. I wanted to see if you were really as wise as you claim, if you were really all-knowing. And you almost missed it, didn't you? You almost didn't notice. The gods stared at him. In all the history of the universe, no mortal had ever done anything this depraved. They had seen murder. They had seen betrayal. They had seen every form of cruelty humans could devise. But this, killing your own son to prove a point, feeding him to dinner guests, this was something new. Only one of the gods had actually eaten anything. Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, mother of Persephone. She was distracted, lost in her eternal grief for her daughter, who was trapped in the underworld with Hades. Her mind was elsewhere. She had reached absently into the pot. She had taken a piece of meat. She had eaten it, Pelops's shoulder. When she realized what she had done, what she had consumed, she screamed. The sound echoed through the palace, through the kingdom, through the world, a goddess's scream of horror and disgust. Zeus was merciful to Pelops. The boy had done nothing wrong. He was an innocent victim of his father's madness. Zeus ordered the pieces of Pelops's body gathered from the pot. He had Hermes reassemble them. He had Clotho, one of the Fates, breathe life back into the body. Pelops lived again, but he was missing his shoulder, the piece Demeter had eaten. The gods crafted him a new one, made of ivory, pure white, beautiful. Pelops would go on to live a long life. He would become a great king. He would give his name to a peninsula, the Peloponnese. But he would always carry the mark of what his father had done. A shoulder of ivory where flesh had once been. Tantalus, however, received no mercy. Zeus struck him down. He was dragged to Tartarus, the deepest pit of the underworld, and there a special punishment was devised. Tantalus was placed in a pool of water, cool, clear, fresh water that came up to his chin. Above him hung branches of fruit, apples, pears, figs, pomegranates, every delicious fruit imaginable. They dangled just above his head. Tantalus was thirsty. He was always thirsty. An eternity of thirst that never faded. He bent down to drink from the pool. The water receded. It pulled away from his lips. It drained into the ground. It left him with nothing but mud. He straightened up. The water returned. He bent down again. The water receded again. He reached up for the fruit. The branches lifted. They swayed just out of his reach. No matter how high he stretched, no matter how he jumped, he couldn't touch them. He lowered his arms. The branches lowered too, just within reach. He reached up. They rose again. That is where we get the word tantalize. To tantalize is to tempt someone with something they can never have. To offer and withdraw. To promise and deny. Tantalus stands in his pool, surrounded by water and food, dying of thirst and starvation. Forever. He is tortured not by pain, but by hope. By the constant, repeated hope that this time the water will stay. This time the fruit will be reachable. This time his suffering will end. It never does. Every second of every hour of every day of eternity, Tantalus reaches and fails, bends and fails, hopes and despairs. And the worst part? He knows why. He knows what he did. He remembers killing his son. He remembers serving him to the gods. He remembers thinking it was clever, thinking it was a test. He has eternity to regret it, and the regret makes the torture worse. These were the mortals who angered the gods. Arachne, who wove too well and told too much truth, who proved that being right doesn't protect you from power, who spins her webs in darkness now, forever. Marsyas, who played too beautifully and boasted too loudly, who learned that the gods don't play fair, who was skinned alive for the crime of making music. Niobe, who had too much and wanted too much credit, who lost 14 children in an afternoon, who weeps still, turned to stone, her tears flowing forever. Actaeon, who saw too much by accident, who was punished not for any choice he made, but for being in the wrong place, who was eaten by the dogs he loved. Sisyphus, who was too clever for his own good, who cheated death twice, who pushes his boulder still, forever approaching the summit, forever falling back. And Tantalus, who tested the gods and failed, who murdered his own son for an experiment, who reaches for water he cannot drink and fruit he cannot eat, forever. The Greeks told these stories as warnings. Don't challenge the gods. Don't boast about your abilities. Don't try to be more than human. Know your place. But there's another way to read these stories. These mortals weren't always wrong. Arachne was a better weaver than Athena. Marsyas was a genuinely gifted musician. Sisyphus was genuinely clever. Their sin wasn't being great. It was being great where the gods could see. The lesson isn't don't be extraordinary. The lesson is be careful who you show it to. Power doesn't like to be challenged. Power doesn't like to be questioned. Power doesn't like to be matched. And in the world of Greek mythology, the gods had all the power. They could transform you into an animal. They could flay you alive. They could kill your children. They could condemn you to eternal torment. And there was nothing you could do about it. So the mortals learned to be careful. They learned to be humble. They learned to bow their heads and make their offerings and never ever suggest that they might be the equal of the divine. Most mortals, anyway. There were always a few who forgot. A few who looked at the gods and thought, I am just as good as you. We remember their names. We remember their stories. We remember the prices they paid. And we remember, maybe, that sometimes being remembered is worth the cost. Arachne is still spinning. Sisyphus is still pushing. Tantalus is still reaching. And their stories are still being told 3,000 years later by people who have never woven a tapestry or pushed a boulder or stood in an unreachable pool. Maybe that's its own kind of immortality. Maybe that's its own kind of victory. There are more stories to tell, more mortals who dared too much, more gods who punished too harshly, more lessons about power and pride and the price of ambition. The old stories are waiting. They've been waiting for thousands of years. And they'll be here whenever you're ready. Until next time, sleep well, and remember, the gods may be watching, but they can't stop you from dreaming.